We like to call it the Supernatural Hour. And now, our hosts.
Today we're going to talk about symbolism. And I'll be honest with you, it is a very, very enormously, gigantically broad topic. We could talk about this for weeks.
Not only is it broad, it is also deep.
It's extremely deep, yeah.
It's like the ocean. We could have a whole podcast just on symbolism.
Right there and there. It's like the ocean. It's deep.
There's a
Oh
symbol
my,
there.
oh my goodness.
And with that,
Symbols.
good night, folks.
I nailed it.
So we realized that there's no way we're going to be able to talk about everything or every aspect of this. But this is something that we have spoken with Doc about on several different occasions, and it's fascinating listening to him. So I am going to just stare at Doc until he starts talking.
Oh, well, I better start talking now. Symbolism is one of my favorite things, I think, to dive into and research. I love world religions. I like understanding deeper meanings of things, and so I've spent a few years diving into particularly archetypal symbolism. And when you think about symbols, symbols are, they can mean a lot of things. The same symbol can have multiple meanings to an individual. They're similar to parables. You can get as much out of a symbol as you're prepared to receive, I think. And so there's a couple of different thoughts about why certain symbols impact us on such a deep level. And the archetypes are kind of these primary symbols that kind of root back to our nature as human beings.
It's even broader than the symbols, though. As I was looking at some of the research and listening to some of the YouTube channels where Carl Jung,
yep, psychiatrist,
talked a lot about it. And I'm sure you'll get into this, but the depth of that, he goes, you can't really explain an archetype with a symbol. A symbol is
the best representation of something,
but it's
deeper.
But it's much, much deeper than that.
Right. So the idea, Carl Jung kind of proposed this idea of what's known as the collective unconscious. And the idea behind that is that as human beings, there are almost learned behaviors, or we notice certain types of behaviors or certain types of patterns that are repeated over and over throughout society. And the idea is that some of these things carry on beyond our lifespan, that they're almost ingrained into our DNA, that they're ingrained into our species. Chad and I were talking a little bit about, like ducks knowing to swim. I think you gave an example about how there was a cat that was raising some ducks, which just seems like an interesting...
Yeah, it was really interesting. And again, this gets down to what's innate and what is instinct for animals and us. And in this case, a cat whose instinct would be to kill a small bird or a duck, literally a baby duckling that was just hatched. And in this case, this cat had just had kittens. The owners didn't know about it. It had been out in the barnyard. But it saw these little ducklings that had just been born, that had been in the incubator. And it just took in these 3 little ducklings. And the ducklings were actually suckling on the cat. And the cat was, the first time they saw the cat, it had one of these little ducklings in its mouth. And it was actually bringing it back to the litter where they, where the kittens and the other 2 ducklings were. And the owners were kind of freaked out. It's like, cats don't take care of ducklings. But what they surmise is that the cat's hormones were in that mothering, nurturing thing to the point, and she saw small, fuzzy animals, and she just nurtured them. That she bonded to them, and she nurtured. And the ducklings, hung around with her.
Well, and it went on to say that ducks are born to just peck at the ground and eat like ducks do. They're not suckling animals, but for whatever reason, they did. I don't know if it's because they saw the cats doing it and thought, okay, I guess that's what you do.
Right.
Yeah, but then in addition to that, you get into the nurture versus nature. You get into addition. So part of this is nurture with the cat mother pulling it in and, putting her arm around him and protecting him. But then she's looking at him like, what are they doing over in the water trough?
Right.
Because cats don't go over into the water trough and swim around, and these brand new baby ducklings are out in the water trough.
Right. They weren't coached. They weren't taught. They just knew to do that.
It was just innate in their nature.
And the way that the use of symbols, I think, as a culture or as a species, kind of harkens back to these deeper innate things with innate feelings within each and every one of us. And Carl Jung, he came up with 12 different archetypes, and I don't know that we'll go into all 12 of them.
And Carl Jung was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud.
Yeah, so
They did that. He was in the late 1800s, and I think he died in about 1960s or late 50s. But he's, world-renowned psychologist. And a contemporary with Freud. I've listened to some things about him talking about Freud and their relationship. And they worked in conjunction with each other and had different ideas on things. They had ideas that were in common on things, and they were contemporaries. It was a really interesting YouTube that I watched on that.
So a couple of the things that he would focus on, these 12 archetypes, there's different figures that we see in a lot of folklore and even in the modern day in film. Symbols like the magician or the hero, or there's 12 of them.
The damsel in distress.
Right, and you can look, look at Harry Potter, look at Lord of the Rings, look at all these things, and you'll find
Star Wars.
Look at Star Wars, and you'll see that almost all of them have very common symbols. You look at Star Wars, and you've got Obi-Wan Kenobi, who's kind of the wise old man. You go to the Lord of the Rings, and you've got Gandalf. These images are something that it's easy for us to accept because I think they're a deeper part of each of our being, and they represent literally parts of us and what we aspire to. He also focused a lot on dream symbolism as well, and that when we have dreams about, sometimes we'll wake up and go, well, that was weird, and I don't know what that meant.
It's interesting about the dream symbolism. It's not a recurring dream per se, because the dream's a little different every time, but it has a recurring theme in it. And the theme is water. And there were times in my life where I just was going through a lot of stress and a lot of turmoil. And I didn't put these together until a little later. But when I was having stress and turmoil, there would be water in the dream. It's like I would go up the canyon and there'd be a little stream. And it was cute. But then it would turn into when you get runoff, that spring runoff where it's just churning and milky and frothy, and if you step in it, you're going to die. It's that kind, but I don't. I'm usually in, this pounding water, and it's terrifying, and I'm scared, but I live. And I got researching this because I thought, why am I always having these dreams? And it just said that water in your dreams means how you're feeling and how you're perceiving where you are in life. And it's like, oh yeah. And then once I was out of that, that stress in my life, I stopped having those dreams. And the interesting thing is, with everything going on in the world that just seems crazy, I actually had the same dream just a couple nights ago, but I wasn't in the water, just like the people of the world were in the water. So
Right.
It's like my own psyche is saying, wow, the world is just really struggling right now.
And isn't that interesting that your subconscious mind is using symbols that maybe you weren't conscious to? And sometimes it takes a while for you to make that connection, but my interest in symbols, part of it started back when I was a teenager. I had a dream.
Not this dream.
I had not that dream.
Oh,
Oh, we're going to have...
it wasn't the terror ride?
No.
That was a great dream
that
too.
damn lagoon ride. That's another story. We'll go into that sometime. No, but this dream was, I was on a ladder climbing up some bright red rocks, like in southern Utah. And I just kept aspiring to get to the top of this big red rock face. And I kept going and going and going. And it was like the thing I wanted more than anything in my dream was to get to the top. And as soon as I reached the top and looked right over the edge of the cliff, there was a snake. And the snake, struck at me, and I fell back and fell off the ladder. And kind of weird that the first thing that happened was I woke up and went, whoa, my life is not about aspiring to power. If I try to aspire to power, I will fall. And, and I started looking into symbolism. I think about red being a very, color symbolism. It's a color of power. It's a color of, in some ways threat or aggression.
Well, and even if, this is a little off the subject, but most restaurants paint it red because red creates hunger.
Yeah,
and it's just another.
I thought that was orange.
I think reds, oranges, yellows.
Okay.
Yeah.
So warm colors.
That kind of color palette.
Got it. And so this kind of prompted my, my diving into dream symbolism and just symbolism in general. And it was so strange to me that I woke up and immediately knew what it meant. And, but I had to research, like, okay, I made, when I started looking through dream symbol books, it made even more sense to me. And I thought, wow, my subconscious mind was trying to tell me something. And if you learn what those symbols mean, I think you can get some deeper understanding out of it for sure. As far as symbolism, there's lots of types of symbolism, and that's why we can kind of take this wherever we want. There's color symbolism, there's number symbolism. We talked a little bit about the Jungian archetypes. We didn't go into much detail there. Even the signs of the zodiac. There's a lot of symbols that are in our everyday life. I mean, every business has a logo, right?
Well, and I found it interesting. I found a little quote by Confucius, and he says, "Signs and symbols rule the world, not words or laws."
Absolutely.
Everything is symbolic. Even some of the things we do when we do residentials to, cleanse out spirits, we put down salt.
It's entirely symbolic.
And the homeowners will, and we don't make the homeowners ask. We usually explain while we're throwing salt all over their house. But we say, the purpose of this, it's symbolic. Salt is a pure substance, and negative entities can't cross pure substances. And it's all about intent, and it's all about symbolism. And by golly, it works.
And sometimes in Hollywood, in the movie, when you see them doing the salt, they'll pour, an inch wide band, and it doesn't need to be that much. It's just, it's the intent and what you're coming up with, not, how much salt you're using.
I think if you've got something super strong, I'd probably put gobs of salt, but we don't deal with anything that terrifying.
But, even there, salt is a symbol. You see that in lots of different cultures. That's not, something that's just unique to one person. I mean,
well, and even going back to salt, if you're into the scriptures, it talks about the salt that's lost its savor, and it's not talking about salt. It's symbolic for people.
Exactly. We use sage and burning of incense, all of those things. If you go to like a Russian Orthodox church, for example, you'll see incense burning. There's lots of other churches where they burn incense. And, the symbol behind that is that you're taking prayers, things that are, here
earthly
on earth, and that smoke is supposed to be symbolic of the ascension of your intent or your prayer to heaven.
And sending the prayer to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't put a stamp on it.
That's right. You can't just mail it to Jesus.
I'd like this to go express.
But there's a lot of biblical symbolism, and I wasn't sure. We can talk elemental symbolism if we want. We talked a little bit about this idea of smoke.
I've got notes with. We're going to go everywhere.
Oh,
we're going to touch on everything just a little bit.
Well, we can.
It's a smorgasbord.
Smorgasbord. Let's talk a little bit about elemental symbolism, just because it's easy, and I think it's something that people can really connect with. Your four main elements are earth, fire, water, and air, right? And they're divided into earth elements and, well, you can call them physical elements and spiritual elements, really. You look at water and earth, those are tangible things that you can fill a cup with, for example, and they tend to symbolize physical or earthly attributes. And then you look at air and you look at fire, and they're not really tangible. You can feel them, I guess, but you don't really hold them. It's not like you put them in a cup. You can't weigh them, kind of a thing. They are those intangibles. And it's that intangible aspect that people tend to attribute the spiritual qualities to those elements.
Well, it's interesting because if you look into horoscopes at all, the horoscopes are divided into the elements. So, for example, I'm a Cancer, and Cancer's a water.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Gemini. I'm air. I hate the wind too. It's so weird.
Well, see, and with me, with water, there's parts about water that I absolutely love, but there's parts about water that I find terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I don't know if it's just the subconscious. Like, I've heard my whole life, Cancer's a water sign. So I don't know if just my subconscious is like, water's my element. But I like water. It's dark, it's deep, it's cool. It doesn't talk at you. See, fire's crackly and would just be loud and noisy, and water's just, and it can be.
You've been to Niagara Falls. It can be noisy.
I was just going to say, it
Very
can be
noisy.
quiet and deep, or it can be noisy, depending on how it goes. But
And some people listen to the waves crashing into the seashore when they go to bed. So I mean, it's talkative as well.
But fire's never quiet. It's always crackle, crackle, crackle.
Have you heard a candle?
They're pretty cool.
Okay, fine.
I mean, every once in a while they flicker, I guess.
Fine.
But you don't hear them.
No, it's true. But what's interesting with a lot of this elemental symbolism is you see it a lot of places. You'll see this union of water and fire, kind of an idea, or earth and air. They're opposing elements, but somehow there's magic in bringing those two things together. That's something that's a very common thread throughout the Bible. For example, is you'll see a lot of this fire and water symbolism, and it's more about bringing union to polar opposites than it is about kind of embracing one or the other.
Because if you think of fire and water, fire can evaporate water, but water can put out fire. I mean, they neither one of them has ultimate power over the other.
Right.
Whoever's more intense at that point.
And what's kind of funny, one of the things that I've been reading about, and take this for what you will, but if you look at religions throughout history, and I'm not, and if you look at the zodiac, there are certain periods of time, there's different ages, the age of Taurus, the age of Aries,
Aquarius.
the age of Aquarius.
I was gonna say, we can sing that one.
Which everyone can sing the age of Aquarius, I guess. But they say that there are these time spans that last a couple thousand years, plus or minus, depending on who you talk to. And if you look at religions through these different times, it is kind of strange. If you go back to the Egyptians, for example, they operated during what we would have considered the age of Taurus in the zodiac, and a lot of their worship was very much earth-based, right? They built pyramids, they built these giant mounds, these giant structures, and they worshipped things like
Bowls.
Bowls. Yeah, there's actually a ritual called the drowning of the bowl that the Egyptians used to do, and it's very symbolic of what we would consider like a baptism. Basically, is they would drown the bowl, and it would be basically taking the sins of the people and cleansing them, kind of an idea. And so you look, it's weird that there's this earth element, Taurus being an earth sign, and the rituals and the worship and the society is almost built on this heavy earth focus, right? And then you start moving into the age of Aries, which is the ram, which is a fire symbol. And this is where you start moving into Moses and Judaism and Jehovah and burnt offerings.
And burning bushes.
And burning bushes. So fire becomes a big symbol. And this is where, as they start embracing this fire symbolism, they start basically rejecting the earth symbolism, the golden calf, for example. That would be the penultimate rejection of the earthly symbol, right? And they embrace this fire symbol with a God that's not tangible, with a God that is, a spiritual focus, right? And so, and worship goes that way. They burnt sheep, they burnt rams, they burnt lambs. That's the animal that they sacrificed to Jehovah. So it's kind of odd that fire symbolism, Aries, and the next phase of this, the zodiac kind of plays through. And this happens for a couple thousand years. And then all of a sudden you get this birth of Christianity who comes to, Jesus, who replaces the law of Moses. And what symbol would most people associate with Jesus?
The cross.
Water.
Or the water.
As far as an elemental symbol.
As an elemental, yes, water.
As an elemental symbol, water, right? The whole focus was the fisher of men.
The
Baptism, and so when you move into this new age, the focus changes. And this is an idea of, instead of worshiping a god in the sky, this was God made mortal. This is a spiritual being embracing
Humanity.
Embracing a physical element, right? This is Jesus being baptized. People say, why did Jesus need to be baptized? He says to fulfill the law. It's a symbol of God or the Spirit coming to earth and embracing mortality, embracing the physical. it's interesting that that plays out that way. And then if you look at Jesus at the Last Supper, one of the things that he mentions is, they said, well, where do we know where to find you, basically? And he said, look for a man holding a water jug. And if you look at the symbol of Aquarius, it's a man holding a water jug. And it's weird because you think, holding a water jug would mean it's a water symbol, but it's actually an air symbol. And so a lot of people think we're transitioning out of this age of Jesus, where everyone embraced Christianity as a religion, and we're moving into Aquarius, which is an airy, new agey kind of an idea of worship. And so that's why society's kind of been moving away from Christianity.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's been an interesting foray. And I'm not one of these guys who thinks that the zodiac really dictates a whole lot in our lives, but it's been a very interesting pattern. And I thought it was interesting that specifically in the Bible, with Jesus knowing he's going away, tells them to look for the man who's carrying the water jug to know where to go. So.
Yeah. And I know we've talked about symbolisms in the past, and one of the things that you brought up with Aries is Aquarius, is that air symbolism is also a sign of communications.
Yeah, electricity,
communications, and it's weird that we're now in an age where technology has given us instant communications. There's we have ways of just communicating instantly between. I can send you a text and it goes across the world if it needed to, but that ability we have is crazy. That's the age we're in.
Yeah, it's like the exact opposite of what you'd see in the the age of Taurus, where everything was very concrete and focused. This is now everything is almost abstract and intangible.
I just think of everything that travels through the air, radio waves and airplanes and rockets, and it's just.
So in the next 1,000 years, what's our next elemental going back to Earth?
Well, yeah, we got a ways to go with the age of Aquarius, I suppose. But yeah, we would go back to an Earth element. I'm trying to remember which one it is. I'm sure somebody listening probably remembers the zodiac cycle better than I do. The sun cycles seem to move in reverse from what the typical zodiac does, if I remember correctly.
All I know is if Mercury's in retrograde, bad stuff happens.
But even going back to this whole zodiac idea, if you look at the Bible. The word holy, people say, comes from the word helios, which means sun. Uh-huh. And Biblia, Bible, comes from books. And so the actual title of the Holy Bible would be the Sun Books. Like I said, we looked at these phases, which is kind of interesting to see some of that in the Bible. And also there's this idea of the central figure being the Son of God, the light of the world. And there's so much sun reference to Jesus as a character, as an individual, right? And then I don't think that it's coincidental that there are 12 apostles, and each of those 12 apostles in a lot of ways symbolizes one of the zodiac signs. The most obvious would be the backstabber Judas, symbolizing Scorpio. And there's some other ones, Virgo and Gemini, the twin. Thomas means twin. There's some interesting overlying symbolism there as well. And so sun symbolism is also something that we see in every culture, but it's not lost, I think, in Christianity or in the Bible. And when I was trying to bring up this focus of sun worship to people, sometimes people question. I said, well, what day do we go to church?
Sunday.
We go to church on Sunday, right? I don't think that you can, in terms of, Christian worship in any way, I don't think you can escape this idea that there is a big overlay with light, with the sun in worship. It's just there.
Well, and I think it's interesting because when you think of the sun, like if you tell a child to draw a picture of the sun, what are they going to do? You're going to draw a circle. Mm-hmm. And shapes are very much integral in symbolism, not only with the elements, but just by themselves. And when you're talking about the sun, it just made me think, in the Egyptian Egyptian culture, the circle meant a lot of things for them. And one of them was representation of the sun god. Mm-hmm. They use the circle a lot to talk about him. And even in the Chinese symbolism, circle expresses heaven. And if the circle is within a square, it's the coming together of heaven and earth, because they use the square as a symbol for earth symbol.
Right. And if you take that back, even the shape of a pyramid, right? Uh-huh. What is the base? It's a square. And it comes up to a singular point. and it's the same symbol that you see. It's a circle and square symbol, and so it's planted in earth, but it aspires to heaven. And just like, if you look at the is it the Temple of Heaven in China, where the base is a square and the dome above it is circular? It's that same imagery, and it's intriguing to me that you see this everywhere. If you look at the flag of New Mexico, and I'm trying to remember, I think it's the Zia
Yellow
culture.
with the red circle and
There's
the
a circle
rays
in
coming
there, and then
out of
there's
it.
four rays that shoot out in
Three
four
rays
different
in
directions.
3 different directions.
It's 4 rays in 4 directions,
Is it?
and the reason for that is just like you were saying, is circles represent spiritual things, and the reason for that is because if you try to calculate the circumference of a circle, we use a number called pi. And what is pi?
3.14159, something like that. Infinite, there is no.
So it's an eternal number, right? It goes on forever. And so when you're determining the circumference of a circle, truly it's an eternal number. It has no end. Not only, everyone understands the circle as, when you draw it, you can't see a beginning or an end, but mathematically it is without end because you use pi to calculate it. And then on the flip side, when we were talking about squares, go back to your 4 elements we just talked about. They're earthly symbols, right? The 4 forms of matter. You've got solid, liquid, gas, plasma. You've got 4 seasons, fall, winter, spring, summer. There's 4 main times of day. There's sunrise, midday, sunset, midnight. And so 4s are very, very physical, very earthly based. And so you see them in every culture. We just talked about New Mexico, in China, in Egypt. There's not only is there the number symbolism there, but there's the actual symbol of the square. And the great thing about a square is it's very finite. You can determine the perimeter of a square. You can calculate it out very well. It's got 90-degree angles. And you can use any of the other angles to prove the other one is a 90-degree angle. And so it's the exact opposite of a circle. But the most interesting thing about it is, how many degrees are in a circle?
360.
Right. And how many degrees are in a square?
360.
Right, because it's 4 90-degree angles. And so even though they are very different in function, they are perfectly equal in degree. And, from a symbolic standpoint, what that tells you is, there's some importance. The physical and the spiritual are of equal importance. And to try to neglect one over the other, I think, is misguided.
Rogue is just shaking her head.
Such a deep topic.
Interesting fact, what shape cannot fall on into itself?
Ooh, I don't know. What's that?
The circle.
Oh.
Every other shape can fall into itself, but the circle cannot. That's why they make your manholes out of circles, because they cannot fall in.
You're talking about, so yeah, you can't find an angle for it to drop.
Exactly.
That's
But if you
interesting.
have a square, you can find a way to make it
That's
fall.
right. You just tilt it up and boom.
Interesting fact of the day.
There you go. I learned something. So yeah, symbolism is everywhere. You see it in everything. Like I said, we were just talking about seasons. And not only is there that idea of 4s, but if you get into the symbolism of seasons, you look at the spring, and it's symbolic of birth, right? And then you go to summer, which is the peak strength of the sun. It's the kind of your big, strong, healthy years.
I'm in my 20s.
Yeah. And then eventually you transition into fall, which is
I'm in my
symbolic of
40s.
our gold. They say the golden years is the time the leaves change. And it's not only that, but symbolically, this is the time where we're able to reap the benefits of our work, right? This is the harvest season. And then eventually you transition into winter, which is death. And it's so interesting that our life cycles are patterned after that as well as beings. We can see so much comparison there. And that's why when you study the Druids or any of these other, cultures that were very close to nature, they celebrated all of these changes because they understood the connection between the earth and us.
Now, you were talking about symbolism as numbers as well, and we touched a little bit on that, but I know coming from people who I talk to on occasion at like work and places, I've had people talk to me about numerology and stuff, and I don't know if you smile a little bit because I know you've heard numerology, but there's interesting things just about numerology, and some people really take that to heart and use it almost as a religion. Like, oh, I see the number 31 everywhere, and now my life is all based around 31. And I look for these numbers, and I know each individual number has its own specific things, but I don't know what your take is on numerology and numbers themselves.
Oh, with numbers, I mean, there is no denying that certain numbers invoke certain thoughts or feelings, But like we were saying, with symbols, you're going to get out of them what you're ready to get out of them too. And what I may interpret a meaning of a symbol to be, someone else may interpret it to be something completely different. But in general, when you're looking at numbers, I mean, number one is kind of that unity, the singularity, whatever you want to call it. That's one's pretty easy. And then you look at twos and you start getting into this idea of duality. And this is where things like creation happen. You look at the whole world is built off of opposites coming together. You got positive and negative charges, this night and day, light and dark, yin and yang, masculine and feminine, physical and spiritual, however you want to define it. And it's all the same thing. If you look at, in Western society, we're not very good at identifying these things because I think we're based on a lot of concrete thinking. And if you look at Eastern religions, they're a lot more abstract. And so I think they pick up the symbolism a little bit better. But it's the twos that lead to creation, right? It's the union of man and woman that creates something else. And when you talk about progression, I use the phrase that 1 + 1 = 3. And that's really what progression is. It's when you bring two things together and you make something else. And then that's where, people talk about 3 being a symbol of power.
I also, in some of the things I was doing, is also the Trinity. And, in Christian cultures, the Godhead or the Trinity, and they talk about that. And I'll go a little further. I wanted to interject that as you go through it, because I've got a couple of others with a couple of numbers a little further on that I thought were interesting.
Sure, go with the Trinity. Go ahead.
No, you go. That's all I wanted to say because you've got more.
Well, with threes and you talk about power. That's one of the things. But there's so many things that play into this as well. You look at the Trinity, the Godhood, God the Father, Christ the Son, Holy Ghost, and in a lot of ways this reflects mind, body, spirit, right? And those are things that make us who we are as well.
Right. When I was, looking in symbolism and just kind of delving into the shapes, and it talked about the triangle, it mentions it represents a lot of things. Like you just said, mind, body, spirit, past, present, future, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. It can also do love, truth, wisdom, waxing, waning, full. I mean, there's so many things that we deal with that come in threes.
Right, and and it's interesting because you go, well, why does the number 3 have such a big meaning? And yes, we talked about this triune nature that we have in a lot of aspects of ourselves, but also if you look at planar space, right, you can have a singular point with 1, you can have a single line with 2, with 2 points you can connect them with a single line. It's not until you have 3. It is the triangle is the smallest shape that creates dimension. Right, all of a sudden you've got axes, and creation can be built on those things.
And if you take one leg away, you've got that 3-legged stool.
Everything falls out.
Falls down.
Right, and so that's where 3s start coming in really big symbolically. Creation occurs in that triune space because you use the 2 to get to 3, and it's through 3 that we're able to build and create, and there's now dimension to what we are and to what we do. Maybe Chad will have something more to say here about the Trinity. I thought he was going to chime in, but he'll be back.
He had to go to the guest speaker.
Yeah, good. So interesting that you're talking about 3 with these things, because and one of the reasons why I bring this up is because I've also heard that number 7 means perfection, which is interesting that you mean you keep talking about 3 about creation, but it could also mean spiritual, a spiritual heavenly kind of thing, right? And then if you get to number 4, I'm going to guess here that 4 means physical, earthly. So to have perfection, you have to have 3 and 4, which would be spiritual and physical.
Right. Create is completion, right? It's exactly what 7 tends to symbolize, because you go from the 3 is being able to, the capacity to create, 4 is being able to materialize things, basically. That's the elemental nature of things.
Right. For 4, there's things like north, south, east, west, the seasons. When it comes to the cosmic elements, sun, moon, planet, stars, human life, birth, childhood, adulthood, death, just like we talked about earlier, the elements, fire, earth, air, water. I mean, a lot of things come in fours as well.
Mm-hmm. And like we were saying, it's that union. It's the mind, body, spirit connection that allows for physical creation into things, and that's where you look at all those. That 4 symbolism plays in. And then 5, you just keep going. We'll talk about pentacles if you want, the star, or whatever symbol you want to use. Even the human body is kind of a symbol of 5. You've got the round head that symbolizes the spirit, and then you've got your 4 limbs based on your somewhat square trunk, I suppose.
What's the name of that?
I have a square trunk.
What's the name of that man that you see it in medical with his arms and legs?
Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man.
Yes, I knew it had a name.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is, so we talked about the head being kind of the spirit, and then the limbs being the physical, and it's that union of that makes mankind, right? It's that union of the spirit with the body. And when you look at the Vitruvian Man, everyone remembers, the figure with the arms and legs, whatever, sticking out, and they remember the circle around it. But very few people realize there's also a square. And so next time you look at Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, take a closer look, and you'll see that there's also a square there, and that was not accidental. Leonardo da Vinci, he grasped a lot of these concepts, I think, as well. And they're symbols that are also frequently seen in alchemy. So you can kind of see that there's this connection of, hey, we have a spiritual self, we have a circle, but we also have a physical self, which is our square. And then our dimensions, he kind of lays out in that symbol of the Vitruvian Man.
Right, and I read a little thing that says if you want to see alchemy symbols, go look at old headstones.
Oh,
because
yeah.
they used a ton of them on the old headstones to mean a variety of things.
Yeah, and and there's a ton of things you'll see in alchemy, or you'll see in Freemasonry, or whatever, particularly.
Harry Potter.
Yeah,
I was gonna go with Fifth Element, but
or the Fifth Element. But there's some great symbolism. If you look at one of the things that I talk with people sometimes about these circles and squares, and you go, okay, well, let's talk about the tools that we make circles and squares with. And, an architect uses a compass to make a perfect circle. And I'm not talking like a compass, like a navigating compass. It's the pointy compass that you put on the ground, and, you put on the paper and you spin it around an axis, and it creates a circle. And they'll use an architect's square to make perfect 90-degree angles. And you'll see that symbolism in lots of places.
It's a huge Masonic symbol.
You see it in Masonry. There's some ancient Chinese symbolism that you'll see it in. You'll see it in alchemy with a symbol known as rebus, which is it's a hermaphroditic symbol. It's a union of man and woman. And if you look on the man's side, he's holding a compass. If you look on the woman's side, she's holding a square. And
you can see it in Harry Potter with the triangle, the circle, and the square with a line in the middle.
It all ties together,
Yes.
And so those are symbols to kind of look for, but you'll see them in lots of cultures. It's not something that's unique even to Freemasonry. You'll see it in, ancient Chinese, and like we were talking about, even in Native American symbolism, we've got circles and squares everywhere. And so as we've discussed, there are tons of different symbols. I mean, we talked, there's color symbolism as well, talk about white meaning purity, or we talked a little bit about red being passion is kind of the big thing there. Green being fertility, and when you look at green lights, it gives you the okay to proceed, and red is that warning to stop.
And yellow means go like hell.
Go like hell.
Yellow, doesn't mean yellow. It means go like hell in this place.
My 4-year-old told me that on the way back from tumbling the other day. Green means go, red means stop, and yellow means go fast.
Go fast, yeah. Nope, doesn't mean slow anymore. But you'll see these symbols everywhere, and I think the more you start, you'll notice them more and more. And we communicate through symbols. Our flags are symbols. Business logos are symbols.
Emojis
are yeah. In fact, as we're no longer using words, which are also symbols. We're just using pictures these days, it seems like.
Going back to the Egyptian days.
Well, and in some ways, the emojis and those kinds of things can convey more or additional information than just the words do.
Right.
Because people can read words and it's like, okay, are they being sarcastic? They being fun?
Right.
And the emojis have actually given us a way in
to get context,
written text to give some context of the goofy smile or the
Right.
the crazy looking smile. You can add a little bit of context through the symbol, where in verbal communication, oftentimes you'll pick that up through voice inflection and those kinds of things.
Right.
But in written communication, so many times people will take things wrong. And I really think the emojis have helped a lot of people communicate better.
Yeah, not run into trouble saying things and be able to let people know it's a joke or whatever. But I think our society is embracing that a lot more. I think we, in a lot of ways, have lost deeper meanings to certain symbols. But the more you study and the more you see, the more you realize that almost everything is symbolic. I don't want to become a conspiracy theorist here, but I feel like you'll find symbolism in everything.
Holidays.
Holidays are
Lots of
crazy. So we
holidays.
talked about Yule a little while back and all the symbols there too. But every holiday symbolizes some transition throughout the year generally.
And we touched a little bit on that when we talked about kind of some of the pagan stuff several episodes ago, back in September-ish, October-ish.
Yeah, Halloween and Yule and how there's symbolism for all of those things. But there's a lot more, I think, with symbolism. If you're interested in hearing more, we can do more segments and talk about specifically number symbolism, color symbolism.
Comment on our
characters,
on our pages, and let us know if that's something you'd be interested in hearing more on. We could maybe do some shorter segments and add a little segment on symbolism.
Yeah, this one was a little broad, maybe a little sporadic. We were kind of pulling from a bunch of different areas, but we can do some focus segments too.
Like we said, this is a smorgasbord where get a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And
It's like, hey, this will be an awesome topic. And then as we're researching it, I was like, oh.
it is an awesome topic. It's just huge.
There's a lot. But we're
Very
going to be
huge.
talking for 87 hours.
It's a big topic.
Yeah, very much so.
I just wanted to say thank you to our YouTube insiders, our patrons. We have a couple of new microphones that we're using today for the first time, and their patronage and donations help us fund the podcast and pay for the web hosting and all of the things that we're doing and new equipment that we're getting. We want to get a new soundboard for Klaus so we can add some cool sound things. It's one of the things that we're looking for to make our podcasts even more interesting. But we have used that money for a couple of really nice new studio microphones, and we've got everybody updated to using the same microphones now.
these are nice microphones.
Thank you.
They're pretty snazzy.
And last, get your Supernatural Hour swag at advanceparanormal.com. We've got shirts, mugs, stickers.
Tapestries.
Always tapestries.
I only say that because there's a new tapestry behind Chad here that says Advanced Paranormal Services.
Yeah.
So now we got two tapestries in our attic of despair.
We have two.
Two tapestries.
And you know what?
Feeling cute up here. We're feeling good.
Feeling cute. Might podcast later. And I'm sorry, but saying tapestry just is fun.
It's not a word that gets used often. Let's be honest.
It makes you
Let's bring tapestry back.
We use it every single session.
Yes, we use it, but more people should use tapestry.
If you don't hear us say tapestry, it's imposters.
That's right. That's the stamp. That's how you know.
Super sus.
And Rogue has just bought some awesome new magnets for our Wispsmobile.
Oh,
We have a Wispsmobile?
Raven bought them.
Oh, Raven bought them. Sorry, Rogue.
I was like, wow.
Oh, we meant you're going to buy them. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, thank you, patrons, for that. That's helping pay for those things. It's Supernatural Hour and Advanced Paranormal. We're going to be involved in some parades and some things, and we will be able to display those magnets proudly
With our
on our vehicle.
Fancy car magnets.
Fancy car magnets.
Or all sorts of fancy, or tapestries and our
Fancy.
magnets.
It'll be fun.
You better have your tapestries hanging on the back of those vehicles as well.
All right. Well, also, we have our own shop at advanceparanormal.com where you can find sage spray. We just got our lip balm in. We've got some cleansing kits. So check out the shop again at advanceparanormal.com.
Just hit the shop tab.
And then my new job is TikTok. So advanced.paranormal, go find our TikToks. We put stuff up there fairly regularly. It's fun.
And it's been fun to see Rogue putting some of the Facebook Live things up. So go out and look at those.
Yeah, it's fun trying to get out there and trying to interact with everybody.
And then just some of Friends of Wisps. We've got the Barbary Coast, where we talked about earlier. If you want a really good pretzel, drizzled with caramel and chocolate and stuffed with cream cheese, very low calorie, go have one. And Dalton's and Oteo's restaurants, fabulous food. Castle's Nature Studio. He is also branched out from doing just nature to portraits. So if you need someone to take your photo, give him a shout. Boar Off-Road Backcountry Off-Road Adventure Rally. They've got as long a name as we do. Holy cow.
That's why you guys are such good friends.
If you like to get into some jeeping and some off-roading, they're a great group, and they,
And
like
service
we
projects.
said before, they love the service projects. And then Utah Freeze Dried for pets.
Utah Freeze Dried for Pets / Rescue Pets Bathhouse, because we're a long name too.
So many long names.
I know, right?
I think that's an episode.
Yep. Stay spooky, my haunty friends.
I love you, Nicholas.
Good night.
Have a good one.
Hey, good night.
You've been listening to the Supernatural Hour at AdvancedParanormal.com. The Supernatural Hour is part of the Radio Ronin network found at RadioRonin.com. Copyright 2021 by Advanced Paranormal Services.